If you took the TV series Pennyworth, the Alfred's The Butler to Batman, and you mix that with the John Wick films, that's sort of the vibe we're going for here. This is a 3-part event, and I'm going to be talking about all 3, non-spoiler of course, as to whether it's actually worth it. Does it stick the landing when it comes from that universe? We have high expectations. Let's jump in. Set in the 1970s New York City, the Continental explores the origin of the iconic hotel for assassins, centerpiece of the John Wick universe, seen through the eyes and action of young Winston Scott. So we have Colin Wood-Dell, who steps into the shoes of Ian McShane's character to play the young Winston, and we have Ayomid Adegan, who takes up the mantle of Sharon from the late Lance Riddick. Kind of our 2 main characters here. Also, obviously, as the sort of bad guy, the guy that is kind of in charge, well, not kind of, he is in charge of the Continental at the moment, playing by Mel Gibson. So each episode is over an hour long. They're almost an hour and a half, depending on which of the 3 you're watching. There's a nice beginning, middle, and end to the arc here, which I really liked. The big bang crescendo of the 3rd episode has amazing action. Like, one thing you can come into expecting is good action, but the style of the action is slightly different. Because one of the things that the director and the executives were going for is a genre I didn't know existed, but it's called disco noir, and that's the feeling that you get. You have that disco vibe, the era that it's set in, with the noir aesthetic, the sort of playing, not kind of cops and robbers, but assassins and humans, is really just the world of the assassins in the shadows, spies, that kind of thing. That is used a lot, and the creativity that we get to see how the action is explored when they're fighting those massive hand-to-hand combat scenes like you'd expect. A very John Wick in essence, but because of the time that it's set in, we have this new kind of stylistic with that noir coming into fruition. But what I liked about it is some of the chances they took with the camera work. There is a scene with glass shattered on the floor, the reflection, just the camera looking at the floor and watching the action through the spectacles and the broken up bits of the glass, which I really appreciated. There's creativity like that throughout, kind of like dotted throughout. So you get your standard kind of following the characters around, seeing the action played out, interlacing, intercutting multiple action sequences happening at the same time. All feels very action heavy and, you know, frenetic and fun to watch. But then you have this really stylistic look and places you in the zone of what that feeling is that they were going for, with the real creativity that is kind of spaced around. Now, you wouldn't care about the action if you didn't care about the actors. I would say that there's a number of characters that we are introduced to in this series that I cared somewhat for. Like, I was sad a little bit when they were getting injured, and I sort of cared, but mostly you are thrust in the storyline of Winston and his family, or who he calls family, and the origin of him. So we get to learn a lot about him. The story centers a lot on what has happened, you know, how he grows up. We have flashbacks of him and the kind of the journey of getting into the Continental, and how he basically ends up where we see him in the John Wick films. That is the journey and the story that we get here. So their character definition, I think, is great, and the actor who plays young Winston, I think, is fantastic. But he is definitely helped by a number of other actors and actresses in here. There's a slight storyline in here to do with the dojo that doesn't really feel like it goes anywhere. It feels like, oh, maybe this is an add-on that we could have to flesh out these characters, because we don't really know what to do with them. Maybe they had more entertaining or more story to go in amongst this, but they cut it, it ended up on the editing floor. I don't know, but for me it just felt like a waste of time with those characters, because I wanted to either know more about them, have some flashbacks with them or their like family, how they got into the line of work that they're in, what makes them tick, or perhaps center on some of the other characters like Lance Reddick's character with the new actor, who is phenomenal. I would say that the casting choice for our 2 main protagonists is excellent, because we have a certain persona of what we know they look like. So they kind of had to get that right. You'd have to easily imagine them as those actors or those characters when they were younger. And for me, they nailed it. they hit the nail on their head. And when it comes to more aesthetically pleasing shots and creativity, I would say that the music is a character of its own in this series. Often will embellish or heighten the sense that they're going for, but also is a character sometimes when it's stylistic and you're not having a lot of dialogue go on in the series or this particular shot or action. There'll be a louder music score or a particular song that will give you the feeling of what you're meant to be experiencing in that moment. So it's definitely a character of its own, and I quite enjoyed it for the most part. Like, I think almost a lot of the time I forgot it was there, so it's in the background, not taking center action, but when it needs to, it's there and you feel it, and it does heighten up that excitement. The sets that they've created for this show are incredible and definitely places you in the zone of this continental world, of the Assassin's world. And the rules are slightly different to ours. Almost everybody seems to be some sort of something in like the darkened belly underground. It feels like almost Gotham City, you know, that sort of thing where there's someone that's, if you know someone will be connected to an assassin in some way, or the underbelly of the underworld somehow. Everybody seems to know something about someone or be trained in something. It does feel like it's a shift of the world, just not quite ours, but almost there. And because of that, we have these different rules of heightened action, heightened abilities, and people just generally being crazy. And that's one of the things I really loved about this. Once you're in the world and we start getting those action sequences, we start getting introduced to crazy assassins. Some of them will definitely hold center stage on screen for longer than others because of the craziness that they embellish, the character that they've created for themselves on screen. They just take up all the space on screen. You'll have some henchmen and the bad guys, and you'll barely notice them because the crazy assassin that you're seeing and what they're doing on screen is fantastic. It's not to say it's messy, it's just we have some amazing characters that are just mental. It reminded me a little bit of some of what John Wick goes through, you know, meeting all those crazy assassins and having to defend himself. Now here, it doesn't seem like there's, I wouldn't say I saw someone that was as quite at his level or ability, because he's John Wick and everything, the universe is almost centered around him. But there were other fighters that you knew were damn good, and they all have their different styles and different weapons and craziness about them. And that's what I enjoyed a lot about this, getting to have a peek into this world. This is what we wanted more of, because the John Wick films are, I think that it spans over a 3-month period, the 4 films. And so we're just kind of thrust into the fighting and his storyline, but we don't really get to see the nitty-gritties or the laws of how things were created. Now, unfortunately, that's not the case with the Continental either. We get to see a little bit of what the Continental came to be, how it came to be, how it changes hands, some of the other rooms that you haven't seen in the Continental, how the Continental works. That it's the Continental story, but you don't really get to see more of the high table. And that's unfortunate, because I was one of those people that was like, if we get a series, I really hope they explain the kind of the mystery. But I guess that might take a little bit of the mystery away from it if you explain everything, rather give people a little bit and keep us on that string, giving that, you know, the donkey with the carrot. I like that somewhat, but I do hope we get more kind of series like this and movies. I know we got the ballerina coming out, and that's great. This was a lot of fun. I do think they took some liberties, and there's some believability even in the world of John Wick that you have to put to a side. But everything works for me here, with the 3 episodes, the 1 episode a night, with the big kind of crescendo of the ending, massive action sequences. For the most part, you believe those characters in their roles, the ability to do what they're doing, and the creativity of this makes this definitely a worthwhile watch, at least once. I don't know if it will have a rewatchability as the John Wick films do. I'll have to go back and see if I do, if I feel like it in a few months. But for now, I thought this was a really fun look at the world of the Continental, the Assassins, the John Wick universe. And I'm going to give this a solid 4.5 Nicolas Cages out of 5.
You got one. Congratulations.
Even though I had some issues with it, those are minor issues. This was definitely worthwhile watching for me. And I think this story is great, because you might not start at the beginning where you love it completely, but it builds and it builds and it builds, and there's a really nice ending that I feel somewhat satisfied with. Mel Gibson, which I haven't talked about, I think is crazy enough to enjoy in this series. I don't think he steals the show. I think that's left to other characters in this, and I'll let you discuss in the comments below who you enjoyed most when you watch this. Thanks so much for watching, but most of all, until next time, remember, live long and Tuesday.